All right. Hello and welcome everyone to the Hydroid 2022 builds refresh. So, I'll be honest, this is not going to be so much a builds refresh as it is going to be a Hydroid doesn't work. Why doesn't Hydroid work video? So, before we get to that, for those of you that do just want to play Hydroid, I do have a build for you. If you want to play him and you just really want to play Hydroid for some reason, maybe it's because his deluxe skin looks absolutely immaculate and he deserves better, then you can use this. This is a usable build that will do the things that Hydroid does, which is replace his 4 with a good ability that you can use to survive, and then you can do good Warframe things like shooting your guns and surviving. But alternatively, it also has the stats in order to use Undertow and use Tidal Surge to go very fast, and also use Tempest Barrage with its augment, which is the only way this ability is ever going to see use. So, with this, you get to do Hydroid things. It is workable in regular non-Steel Path content. You can kill enemies with it, and it's not good, but it works. And then in Steel Path, it's bad. It's just bad, and it doesn't work great, but it kind of works, and you have Resonators, so you can just shoot the enemies with your guns. It'll be fine. Just shoot the enemies with your guns. It's okay. But yeah, that's what is going on here with Hydroid. We're going to talk about in this video the problems with Hydroid and try and understand why they exist, even though the answer is that I don't know why they exist, and they've clearly tried to fix this multiple times, and it just has not happened. So yeah, let's talk about Hydroid and how I think he's supposed to work, and if that would even be good if that was the case. So we are going to spawn in some enemies, and we're going to pause AI so I can show off the features of his build. So we have some enemies over here. Now, his abilities, his main signature ability, I would say, is to turn into a puddle. This is his thing. This is his like special form. Ideally, you would think a Warframe with a special form would have their whole kit built around it. And you can use multiple powers from this that have synergies with it. The ability that does not really have synergy with this is your 4, which just puts enemies up on tentacles and they can't go into the puddle, and a bunch of other stuff. But your 4 is kind of a separate build because it gets you extra loot when you kill the enemies that have been touched by the tentacles. We're not really going to be talking about that because if you want to use that, instead, in almost all content, you should just use Cora with her 4 augment instead, because she's like a fully realized Warframe that has good abilities for doing Warframe things. So if you're looking for a loot build, you should go watch the Cora video instead. Otherwise, that loot ability is useful in one particular place, and that is against the Grove Specters. So if you're doing the Grove farm, maybe that's the one time you're going to be kicking up Hydroid in order to do something with him, but that's pretty much it. So let's talk about the other abilities. So you're in your puddle, and you're in your puddle and doing stuff. You can hit 2, and you can use your wave dash ability to move around as the puddle. Now, the whole thing with the puddle is that enemies can fall into it. And when the enemies fall into it by touching it or by being tentacled into it, which also, by the way, the tentacling costs energy for no reason. This ability has almost no range by default and is tiny and hard to use, but you can tentacle enemies into it. And you can see the ramping up damage over time against these fodder enemies will eventually kill them. So the whole thing is to get them into this puddle so you can do small amounts of damage over time. The big problem is that enemies do not stay in this puddle. If you move away from them and they're still in the puddle, they will simply exit the puddle, which sucks and is awful. Enemies, in my opinion, and as far as I can tell from the patch notes that have been around Hydroid, are supposed to stay in the puddle and not fall out. And if they stayed in the puddle and did not fall out, that might actually be kind of okay to use, but instead, it's just generally pretty bad. The other thing is that you can pick up enemies when you use your 2 on these enemies. And enemies are supposed to stay in the puddle, but as you can see here, they don't. And whenever you dash away, very often a ton of enemies will fall out of the puddle. And because the enemies fall out of the puddle, this becomes completely pointless to be able to dash around in your puddle unless you're trying to avoid damage, but you're invincible during your puddle anyway, and it goes much further if you're not in puddle form. So this is actually good for, like, you know, going through missions very quickly, and that's all fine and dandy. But ideally, you'd want to get into your 3 and then use this as mobility in order to pick up a bunch of enemies and then start dealing damage to them. And then plus that, with the augmented 1, you can throw your 1 out, and then every time this hits an enemy, it puts a corrosive proc on them to like strip armor and then do some amount of damage. The augment recently got buffed so that it gives double damage to itself, basically, which is moderately okay. My big question is, why does this still do corrosive procs? Corrosive procs got nerfed, and this ability was never that good. Please, for the love of God, change it to just a raw, like 25% armor strip so that it can fully strip armor. Because, dear Lord, is it horrible, like horrible, horrible, since the nerf to corrosive in general. With all that, basically, enemies are supposed to stay in the puddle, and they don't. And even if they did stay in the puddle, the damage is too low to be worthwhile. So all those things coming together, Hydroid's just not worth using. The thing that Hydroid needs very badly is for enemies to stay in the puddle and for the puddle to ramp up damage at a much faster rate. I'm very fine with it being lower damage at first and you having to like wait to get, you know, it increased, and also you can't pick up energy while you're in the puddle, so you're gonna have to exit it at some point. If this just had a ramping damage the longer you can sustain it, and you know give you a good reason to like be like prime flow and all that stuff to have really large amounts of energy so you can sustain this for a very long time, that all sounds great. And the ability to like puddle around and like pick up like, you know, whole hallways of enemies and kill them, and then use your 1 if it was changed to like a raw armor strip to hit enemies that are in your puddle, get all that armor off them so that that ticking damage can actually get to them and get through that heavy armor. That sounds like a playstyle that is maybe not for me, but definitely would work and be okay given enough damage. And that sounds fine. The other thing is that his 4 augment, if you wanted to use it and actually like play Hydroid as opposed to be like a glorified use 4 which does no damage and then have a different Warframe kill those enemies because they're actually good at that, the thing that would be really nice for that augment is to have it instead be enemies killed by Hydroid's abilities. Because enemies killed by Hydroid's abilities would then mean you could use your puddle, like, as Hydroid to kill the enemies and get those extra loot drops, which might give you a real reason to, like, do that playstyle. But as for right now, visually, all the things about Hydroid I think are, like, nice, right? Like, this is, like, a cool, like, wave animation. I think his 1 is, like, you know, neat. It's like supposed to be like ship cannons firing down in a barrage. Like, that's all fine and good. And I think like the visual for the puddle is fine. And like the visual for like his 4 is fine too. But everything that's here mechanically is like devoid of value in the game that is Warframe right now. It doesn't do enough damage to be relevant. You're super slow while you're doing it. And even though you're invincible, so are a lot of Warframes, honestly. Like, a lot of Warframes can be invincible, running at full speed down a hallway, blendering every enemy that's ever spawned, and also killing their entire family line. So I don't know why Hydroid's not allowed to have number, but holy shit, please, somebody help Hydroid, because he's a puddle in more ways than one. So yeah, that's Hydroid. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed this video. Please, Hydroid's he's got all the interesting looking abilities with none of the mechanical depth or goodness that is absolutely needed in what Warframe is in 2022. So yeah, that's what's going on with Hydroid. He looks really nice. I'd really love to give other people a reason to buy this deluxe skin because it's really cool looking, and also it pairs well with this idol that is from the Excalibur deluxe skin. But yeah, don't use Hydroid. There's no real reason to do it. No real reason to do it. Moving on. Let's go to the next builds video. Holy shit.